So I just finished Unicorn Overlord on the expert difficulty, and I will say what a wild ride it was. I enjoyed all of it. I will say though, there were times where I feel like there were things that I wish I knew earlier that I could make use of. Now the game does do a good job at teaching you a lot of things that you can use throughout the game, but there are some things that you sort of have to figure out yourself. And for me at least, I feel like if I had known these things a little bit earlier, maybe that would have affected how I played the game and maybe affected how smoothly my run would have been. So I thought I would do that and help out any of you there who, if you are new to the game or if you are new to SRPGs in general, or maybe if you're even a veteran, maybe you will still find out something new about this specific game that is a little bit different than other games. So let's get on with the tips for Unicorn Overlord. The first one is a fairly standard one if you are a veteran of the SRPG type of genre, and that is maximizing your XP gains in a battle. Specifically at the end of a map where you're about to defeat the final boss, if you have 2 Valor left over, a lane, much like most games a la Fire Emblem style, your main character has a skill that can increase the XP gain for a unit by 100% for 2 Valor points. So if you know you're about to get a kill on the boss and you know that you have 2 Valor that you're not really going to use for anything else, you may as well use that to get some extra XP. And you may as well also, if it doesn't change the outcome of the battle, use supports such as your archers or your mages from other units, because any support units also get XP when they participate or help out in a battle. Speaking of supports though, not only are they good for getting extra bit of damage, they can do a lot of damage in the sense not only of their own attacks, but in the form of RNG manipulation. Sometimes you'll notice that if you turn on an assist, you might actually do less damage or something like that. And that is because the RNG gets rerolled for the battle, where maybe now all of a sudden you miss an attack, or you hit an attack, or you get a crit, or likewise the same thing could happen for the opposing team. So just having a ranged support nearby so you can sort of toggle to see your options is always helpful. But other than that though, if you don't have a support option, or maybe an extra bit of RNG manipulation you can do, is you can actually shuffle around the units in your squad and change their positioning, and that can also have an effect. Obviously, this is not really RNG manipulation as much. This is also changing with the tactics of the opposing unit. Because now maybe because of a change in your formations, they might target somebody else and they might miss that attack, and so on and so forth. All of this can have an effect on the battle and who comes out on top. But enough about the ranged support units. Instead, I want to talk about flyers. Now, again, if you play Fire Emblem or any of those tactical RPGs, you will know flyers are broken in those games, and just the same in Unicorn Overlord, it is the same, where having flying units or just mobility in general is incredibly useful. There are some big maps that in some cases require you to traverse a big area in a short amount of time for some rescue missions, and flyers are absolutely your best bet for getting there quickly. Throw on a light feather to give them doubled speed for 30 seconds, 30 unpaused seconds by the way, and you basically have a car just speeding down, or speeding through the air rather. But what the flyers also do is that they also enable another broken thing, which is the Witch's Teleport, which is the valor skill that they provide that allows you to teleport any unit to any other unit or facility across the entire map. There is no AoE restriction or range restriction. If you can send a flyer straight to the enemy boss, and you have a witch in all of your parties, you can just bum rush and skip the entire map essentially once your flyer is there. And again, this can be very helpful, because if you were to try and push up on foot, you would have to deal with all of the stamina, all the battles along the way, whereas instead you could just have your main units just sitting in a garrison where they don't lose stamina, have your flyer go across the map, and then once they're there, just teleport your main kill unit across the map. The Witch's Valor skill is by far, I think, one of the most broken Valor skills in the game. Because again, just like Fire Emblem, mobility is king. The sooner you can traverse the map, the better. And you know what, speaking of witches and their Valor skills, just certain Valor skills in general are insanely useful, especially once you upgrade units into their promoted form. Because many single target or unit selected abilities now become AoE, which makes them incredibly useful. Take for example housecarls such as Orban. Initially, they spend 2 Valor to restore 2 stamina to 1 unit. It seems like an okay trade-off, you know, 1 for 1, 1 Valor, 1 stamina. However, when you upgrade them to a Viking, it still costs 2 stamina, except you now restore, or it still costs 2 Valor, except you restore 2 stamina to all units in an area. You effectively could get 5 units in there and get 10 stamina back, all for the same amount of Valor that you spent initially. Now, speaking of garrison points, the game does mention this to you, and I was still amazed when the first time I read this, but when you withdraw a unit back into a stronghold, you get that 1 Valor back that you spent on deploying them. So it is effectively free to just teleport them around the map, not with a witch skill, but you can teleport them to different facilities that allow for garrisoning and deploying and withdrawing. So if, for example, you say you've pushed up into a map and you're sort of running low on stamina or running low on health, what you can do is you can have people garrison or withdraw at one command post and then have them redeploy at somewhere else completely different on the map, just so that they have a spot to rest up. And then when they're ready to go again, you just have them redeploy at the other place where you were and have them carry on. It's essentially free teleports to allied garrisons. And like I said, teleporting is incredibly broken in the game. The next tip has to do with the Colosseum, which you unlock during Dragonhold. Now, the Colosseum has a lot of very nice items that you can get if you can beat the opposing units. But here's the catch though. When I say beat, you don't have to actually like kill the entire unit and one-round them. All you have to do is technically win the battle. So in theory, if you do 1 damage and they do 0 damage back to you, even though you're both basically at full health, because you did more damage, you will win the battle. Now, there are many ways that you can then use this to your advantage to cheese out a lot of wins against much higher level and much more tactically prepared units in the Colosseum. You could dodge tank your way through it with blinds, or you can freeze them. In fact, if you want to freeze them, I have a good team for that, which is the Dragoon Dive with Ice Conferral, which is very powerful. Speaking of Dragonhold though, the game does mention that it is a sort of open world. You can go anywhere you want once you finish the first area of Cornea, and that is true, but it is also in the same way sort of implied that you go in a certain order to the different regions because of the levels. The levels do not scale according to the order, they are fixed levels throughout the different regions. And if you look at the levels, you might be inclined to go to Dragonhold first, but I implore you, go to Alheim just for the introduction. You get a great unit there, it's a promoted unit, so they have 2 AP and 2 PP right off the get-go, and that is going to be for free. You don't have to do a mission to unlock them, it's great. Speaking of new units though, my next tip is sort of a personal thing. It is to experiment with your teams. When I was playing through it, every time I got a new unit, my thought process was, okay, how do I slot this unit into somebody else's unit? How do I replace somebody else with you? And I mean, yeah, it makes sense. You know, you don't want to stop and have to redo all your units, but I feel like every now and then you should do that. You should take a moment to just stop and, you know, maybe wipe out all of your units and then just take some time to properly rebuild from the ground up. Because you never know, maybe because you got some units, you know, piecewise across your playthrough, you never really put them together at one team. You just sort of sprinkled them around and you never thought to put them all in one squad. Next up is some little tidbits that I am absolutely certain is never told to you. I found this out by accident. But on the overworld map, speaking of rearranging your units, instead of having to open up the menu and then going into unit formation, on the overworld you can just press X straight from the map and you will go straight into your unit formations. The game does not tell you this, even in the top left hand corner where it shows you what the buttons do, it does not tell you this, but it is a great time save with how often you will be going into your unit formations. Speaking of pressing X though, in battles as well, at the bottom middle it tells you what skills are being used. If you're ever unsure what those skills are, you can press X and that will show the details of that skill being used. Now of course the battles do go quite fast, so the skills do flash by very quickly, but there's another solution for that. If you press Y during the battle, it pulls up the battle log showing all the skills in the order they were used and what they do, and it also pauses the battle so you can take your time to read and see what is being done. Another tip that I'm pretty sure most people have heard about by now, it is with regards to divine shard farming, and that is obviously when you go mining at any of the various regions throughout Fevrith, you have the possibility to pick up divine shards. That of course is essentially an infinite farm. Yes, it may be a bit grindy and be a bit slow, but it is a great way to get divine shards for some very powerful items from the divine shard shop. Now of course mining isn't free, however, some of the other items that you get from mining, such as the ores, can be sold back to the towns for honestly more gold than what you use. So it is quite essentially an infinite farm of gold and divine shards, and you shouldn't in theory ever need to run out of gold from mining. The next tip has to do with certain classes, specifically classes that equip 2 of the same item, or weapon rather, namely sword fighters, for example. Sword fighters can equip 2 swords and then 2 accessories, so you might think to yourself, wow, 2 swords, double the damage, right? No, that is unfortunately not the case. The sword fighter only gets the attack increase from their highest stat weapon. The other weapon does not provide any of the attack boost if it is lower. It will of course still provide any active skills or passive skills it provides, as well as the bonus stats such as increased crit rate or whatnot. But my last tip though for units is use shamans. Shamans are ridiculously broken, purely because of how their debuffs or how debuffs and buffs work in general. In my opinion, whenever I found an enemy unit that gave me trouble, it was more than likely because of a shaman on the opposing team. And that's because the way that the damage calculation is done, the debuffs and buffs affect your stats before factoring in the enemy defense, in terms of attack, for example. So let's say you have an attack stat of 61, the enemy has a defense stat of 30. 61 minus 30, that means you should do about 31 damage. Now, if you have a buff of 50% damage increase, this 50% is on your attack stat before defense reduction. So 61 now goes to about 90 attack. That 90 attack minus 30 defense gives you 60 damage, which is effectively speaking like a 100% increase. Conversely, however, if you take a 50% decrease in your attack stat, you go from 61 to let's say about 31. Now you're taking 31 attack minus 30 defense and you're doing 1 point of damage. Maybe a bit of a higher, but then again, there's always the guards to factor in as well, which reduces damage even more. Which again, by the way, guarding by itself, if you do not have a shield, guard is a 25% damage reduction. If you have a regular shield, it is a 50% damage reduction when you guard. And when you have a great shield, it is a 75% damage reduction. That is what that guard efficiency means on those shields. But that is it for my quick little few tips of mine that I thought I would like to share for you. Again, maybe you knew some of these, maybe you didn't know some of these. Maybe there are some tips that you think you would like to share with others, so maybe you can do that in the comments down below. But hopefully though, you take all of this and put it to good use in your own playthroughs of Unicorn Overlord. Until next time then, bye bye.